Hi, I'm Lynn Cornell, and welcome to Journey Through the Bible Verse by Verse. Grab your Bibles and follow along as we study through each book of the Bible verse by verse and chapter by chapter. I'm using the Holman Christian Standard Bible, so if you're reading from a different Bible translation, the read is different, the method is the same. We're going to continue now studying the Gospel of Matthew, and we're in chapter 25. Now, keep in mind this, that chapter headings and verses were not a part of the original writings. They were added many centuries after the writings for quick references, and they help us navigate through scriptures, and we can find passages with a greater ease. The disadvantage is that they break up the flow of thought because for whatever reasons, the people who placed the chapters in the verses did horrible jobs. And this is a good case of this. Chapters 24 and 25 should be one chapter because the thought is so mangled here and broken up. Remember, this is an ongoing discussion that began actually in the 23rd chapter when Jesus made his pronouncement over Jerusalem. And he said that they would not see him until they cried out, "Blessed is he who comes in the name of the Lord." Now, as he was leaving the temple, the disciples said, "Look at this wonderful, magnificent edifice." And he said that this temple is going to be completely destroyed. And as they left and settled on the Mount of Olives, they asked Jesus three questions. When will these things be? Meaning the destruction of the temple. And when is the sign of your coming and of the end of the world? And so Jesus has been answering those three questions. And so really in verse 45 in the 24th chapter, Jesus shifts thought. He shifts attention as he's expounding on the third question, meaning when is the end of the world. The reason why is because he's addressing this concern and this yearning that the Jews have, and that is they are anticipating, they are yearning for their Messiah, and they had hope that he would break the yoke of Rome off of their necks. They had hope that he would restore the glory of the kingdom. And though Jesus is the Messiah and is revealed as the Messiah, his first coming was as the Lamb who takes away the sin of the world. Well, that's sort of a disappointment to them. And so now Jesus really is addressing that sort of sentiment, because what should they be thinking? In other words, and it's going to be a word it's going to use, that he is going to be delayed. Now let me read this because I want to read this parable in the 45th chapter. I'll say one other thing, and this is kind of a sidebar issue. It's for us Christians today, and that is this. As we look for the rapture of the church, or the second coming of Jesus Christ, Jesus said, no one knows the day or the hour. And it is amazing that since he so plainly said that there are people who then think they have the date. Now we know the time. We know the time and the seasons. We have prophetic markers and signs. But he says of that day and hour, we won't know. And in every generation, there are people who think they know a date. They know the exact date that Jesus is coming back. But the problem, and let's say that, okay, Jesus is not even the Son knows, but let's say even if I thought that I'm special, that God would give me revelation, even more than the Son, and God's going to give me that date, and I'm going to know, and I share that date with people. Well, besides it being wrong, and besides that, every single date that a person is given has not come to pass, has failed, right? But that's just, okay, let's just suppose I think I'm special and I have a day. That's not even the worst part of it. It is the conclusions that people draw from those days. In other words, there are people who think that, okay, since I know the date that Jesus is going to come back on a certain date in a certain month in a certain year, I'm going to quit my job. I'm gonna divest all my investments. I'm going to draw my money out of the bank. And even sadly, some people give that money to the church. There's some people who might even move with this some kind of communal living situation with fellow believers. They might live in a church or may move out into a field. And the whole idea is that they're waiting for Jesus to come. They're waiting for Jesus to come. Well, nowhere in Scripture that we're ever instructed to just stop and sit and wait. And I'm going to share with these first three these parables here. There are 4 parables here that Jesus is going to deal with that. And we're to always be alert. We're to always be watching, and then even more so doing. But doing what? Doing whatever He told us to do. Doing what I'm supposed to do. Okay. Now, so we read this verse before. I'm going to read it again because it's so fitting here. So I'm in the 24th chapter of Matthew, and verse 45 says, "Who then is that faithful and sensible slave, whom his master will put in charge of his household, to give them food at the proper time? That slave whose master finds him working, when he comes, will be rewarded. I assure you, he will put him in charge of all his possessions. But if that wicked slave says in his heart, 'My master is delayed,' and starts to beat his fellow slaves and eat and drinks with the drunkards, that slave masters will come on a day he does not expect, and at an hour he does not know, and he will cut him in pieces and assign him his place with the hypocrites. In that place there will be weeping and gnashing of teeth." Now, again, notice the term, right? That he should be, that when his master comes, he finds him working. And what is the thing right here? What should this slave should have been doing? Providing the food and the care for his fellow slave. But he says, oh, if my master is delayed, what did he say he was going to do? He was going to take advantage of his fellow slave, be drunkard, all these kind of things. He said, and his master is going to come in a day and an hour in which he's not expecting him. By the way, he's saying this to the nation of Israel. What should you be doing if your Messiah is delayed? Now, chapter 25 and verse 1 says, "Then the kingdom of heaven will be like 10 virgins who took their lamps and went out to meet the groom. 5 were foolish and 5 were sensible. And when the foolish took their lamps, they didn't take olive oil with them. But the sensible ones took oil in their flask with their lamps. Since the groom was delayed, they all became drowsy and fell asleep. In the middle of the night there was a shout, 'Here's the groom, come out and meet him.' Then all those virgins got up and trimmed their lamps. But the foolish ones said to the sensible ones, 'Give us some of your oil because our lamps are going out.' Then the sensible ones answered, 'No, no, there won't be enough for us and for you. Go instead to those who sell and buy oil for yourselves.' And when they had gone to buy some, the groom arrived. Then those who were ready went out with him into the wedding banquet, and the door was shut. Later, the rest of the virgins came and said, 'Master, Master, open up for us.' But he replied, 'I assure you, I do not know you. Therefore, be alert, because you don't know neither the day or the hour. Now, first and foremost, to understand this parable, again, we have to understand it in the context of a Jewish wedding. But remember, the greater context that Jesus is giving is when, and he's giving different aspects, by the way, of a kind of a prophetic picture. The first one, remember, the slaves were the responsibility of what are my duties. And basically, all three parables that we're going to tell has to do with what are my duties? What is Israel's duties? And he's telling us from different aspects, okay? All three parables said, in light of what my duties are, I should continue to do my duties. I should be alert, expecting my master's return. And I should be ready. Now, how do I be ready? How am I to be prepared? Okay, in this case, he's talking about a wedding. So the responsibility of the virgins, and we could say this, a bridesmaid. Okay, what were their responsibility? Their duties were to prepare the bride. They were also a part of the wedding party. And their part was that when the groom came, they were to escort the bride. There was this, in these times, the wealthy weddings, they could last up to 7 days in celebration. And there was all kinds of aspects to this, aspects to the celebration and stuff. And one of the parts is that they would have this celebration. The groom would be off doing whatever. And so then the bride would be waiting. And then what would happen is that these bridesmaids were to have these torches. Now, at some part of the ceremony and at some part of the celebration, there was this march, this ready march that was going to take them from where the bride was to the wedding banquet. And the part of the bridesmaids was to burn these torches. And they would form this line. So this wedding procession would happen where the bride would march to meet her groom, and then they would go into the wedding banquet. Now, at some point, that whatever it was, they lit the torches. So when the groom was delayed, they still had all. And this is where this idea of when the wedding party, when the groom was delayed, their lamps were still burning oil. The wise bridesmaid had anticipated that and had provided enough oil. The foolish didn't. So when there was a shout, "Here comes the groom," then the foolish bridesmaids didn't have enough oil. In other words, their torches were going to go out, which means there was no reason for them to be in the party. Why stand there with a torch that didn't give light? We could have the fire. It was a part of the ornament, all that kind of stuff. Okay. Well, the wise did. See, imagine you're in a bridal party today. You're in a bridal party. And part of that is you procrastinate and you don't have a dress. You're supposed to have a dress, a certain color scheme, and all of that kind of stuff. We've seen Bride Gilla, and all, what's that movie? Bride Gilla and all that. The whole point is that if a bridesmaid failed to have the dress doing in time for the wedding, there's no reason for her to be in that wedding. She won't be in there. Why? The whole purpose is for her to be in the wedding. I mean, to have the dress in the wedding. Well, the same way, the whole purpose for the brides, these virgins, these bridesmaids, was to have those torches ready so that they can stand there and give light as the bride marches with her groom. That's why they was foolish. That's why they was rejected. All right, I'll pick up with the rest of this chapter in the next video. So I'll see you then.